In today's video, I'm going to show you how I turned 2 acres of weeds into lush pasture using a permaculture method without the use of heavy machinery. I used only tools that most people would have available to them and steered away from the use of broad applications of herbicide. I'm really happy with the results and I'm excited to share with you the process, so stay tuned. Before we started, we had a 2-acre area that could serve as potential pasture for the livestock that we wanted on our homestead. The main struggle was that it had been unmanaged for several years and was overgrown with weeds and trees and provided poor forage for animals. We didn't have any access to heavy machinery like a tractor, so we had to think of a way to convert this plot into a manageable pasture. We didn't have any livestock at this point to help with weed suppression either, and we knew that we wanted to avoid the use of herbicide whenever possible, so this left only a few options. This led us down the path of least resistance, and we had to use what was already there for us. When we initially stood out in the plot of land, we were met with weeds the same height as us. These weeds included giant ragweed, mare's tail, and goldenrod that were absolutely loving the neglect and had found their niche. They were just on the verge of flowering and reseeding themselves. With the limited resources available to us, we decided that our goal would be to work with nature, not against it, and to use these weeds to our benefit the best we could. The first step was to knock over the weeds with the weight of my mower and to bend the stalks over onto themselves. This prevented the weeds from going to seed and created a dense mat of biodegradable material that also suppressed new weed growth. Plants that were too big to be pushed down with the mower were cut down with my handheld brush cutter or the chainsaw. With the weeds knocked down and the trees removed, we maintained the site by mowing until the end of the growing season. Overseeding was done in the fall and spring of the following year. While we had to use the weight of our mower, the same principle could be applied by bush hogging once the plants are large enough to provide coverage, and by additionally allowing livestock to graze over and knock down any new growth. The solution to our initially daunting problem was so simple and effective. The weeds did the majority of the work for us. They smothered the existing undesirable plants and prevented new annual weeds from reseeding themselves into the next year. They also provided a water absorbent layer to keep newly seeded perennial grasses hydrated. That mat did such a great job of keeping everything hydrated that once we seeded, we never had to water the pasture. The only use of herbicide for the entire project was painting the trunks of the trees that had been cut down with the chainsaw. The ultimate goal of the project was obviously to create pasture, an area for our livestock to graze, but we also wanted to improve the soil at the same time and create a self-sustaining habitat that would support our livestock and at the same time bolster the eco-diverse natural world that was already there. It's really a mindset of keeping the homestead in your mind as an ecosystem of like a living and breathing web of these interdependent species and organisms. We thought to ourselves, what would this area, what would this land have looked like had humans not interfered so many years ago? It would have been managed by nature. Buffalo and deer would have eaten and trampled their way across the landscape, keeping the natural balance of the plants in check. Those weeds that we had cut down were just, nature's way of trying to reclaim the land that was already there. It was basically filling in all the voids that had been opened up by human intervention, whether that was overuse and depletion of nutrients that were supposed to be in the soil, like hydrogen and carbon, nitrogen and phos. All those things get shifted out of normal once we start putting our own pressures onto that system. And that's essentially what those weeds were. They're this bank or battery of nutrients and minerals that were there and ready to be used. We just accelerated that process by knocking them down and letting them degrade back into the soil. Nature was essentially providing us a free cover crop of weeds, free green manure. If I had animals, they'd be converting these weeds into manure or fertilizer. This would in turn feed the soil itself and the microorganisms that make up a healthy soil. The synergistic relationship between these core nutrients and the microbiology of the soil is the foundation for a healthy pasture. Without this solid framework, the pasture wouldn't thrive. The key was not to throw off the existing balance. Tillage and synthetic chemical intervention destroys the fragile balance and kills microbes and existing mycorrhizal fungi networks. Once disturbed, nutrient cycling of decaying plant matter slows to a halt. At no point during this process did we have to add additional nutrients such as fertilizers or even irrigation. This is our permaculture approach and not necessarily a fit for everyone. We feel as though the results speak for themselves. Moving forward, we are excited to introduce sheep to our homestead and progress the pasture towards a native species grassland in upcoming videos.